Danzo Shimura is without a doubt the most hated character in the Naruto series, and he is also the originator of a massive plot hole in the story. Today we're going to analyze this plot hole, explain why it doesn't make sense, explain how it starts, which is with a retcon, and try to justify its existence within the story, explaining how a few factors could potentially make this plot hole work without changing anything. Danzo was created as the antithesis of Hiruzen Sarutobi, and also the will of fire itself. Danzo believes that a true ninja is the one who walks through the shadows doing the dirty work, never complaining about his harsh life, never trying to get glory, and this is very much exemplified by Danzo himself and how he lives his life, as well as the root Anbu, which is commanded by Danzo. Danzo found the notion of the will of fire stupid, and he felt like the village had no future if it kept on going that way, where shinobis valued friendship and bonds more than the mission itself, and did not fully erase their emotions, but instead they clung to them. Danzo's life goal was to overthrow the Will of Fire system so that the village wouldn't fall into decadence and remain strong, protecting its citizens and the Land of Fire. Now you can discuss all day long if Danzo had a point or not. The story actually treated Danzo at the end of his life as a hero. His death is pretty heroic, if you think about it, and Kishimoto wanted to make a point that Danzo, sure, he didn't have the most cleanest methods in the world. Perhaps he wasn't right dismissing the Will of Fire, but he wanted the good of the village first and foremost. And yes, most of you will hate Danzo regardless. I found him actually a fascinating character. But this video is not about that. This video is about the plot hole that is created because of Danzo. So to overthrow the Will of Fire system, Danzo's main goal, objectively speaking, was to become the Hokage of the village. That is the most efficient way for him to control everything, because he has control over the shinobi of the village. He can choose any ninjas that he has available in the village to go fulfill any missions, and he can impose several different policies that can change the outlook of the village itself and shinobi life. He can change the training system to make it more brutal, so that in the academy you already have to train how to raise those emotions and forget about the Will of Fire. And most importantly, if Danzo is Hokage, a proponent of the Will of Fire, somebody that inherits Hiruzen's philosophy, will not be in control, and so they won't be able to spread the Will of Fire anymore. And eventually Danzo manages to become Hokage. Obviously he's never fully instated as Hokage because he dies shortly after, but he actually achieves that step of his master plan to erase the Will of Fire. But think about this for a second. If Danzo's main goal there was to become Hokage, why did he wait up until midway through Naruto Shippuden to do so? And you may say, well, it's because that's when Tsunade got in a coma, and so he could become Hokage, kinda ousting Kakashi from the position, because some people like Shikaku, for instance, wanted Kakashi to be Hokage, but obviously he convinced the Fire Lord, this is not Avatar, the feudal lord of the Land of Fire, to make him Hokage instead. Some people even say that he maybe used Koto Matsukami to do that, which is an interesting theory. I can certainly see Danzo using Koto to make sure he would be chosen as the Hokage, but this is never explicitly stated or implied even. But if he used it on Mifune to make him the leader of the Ninja Alliance, I don't see why he wouldn't use on the feudal lord to make him Hokage. And yeah, Tsunade was in a coma. Nobody else, except for Kakashi, I suppose, would be a suitable candidate. I mean, at that point, Sage Mode Naruto was extremely powerful, but Naruto wasn't experienced enough, and so Danzo was picked. However, there is a moment way before that where Danzo could have ascended to become Hokage, and there weren't nearly as many hurdles for him to overcome, which was just after the Chunin exams when Hiruzen died fighting Orochimaru. The Hokage position was literally open. Kakashi wasn't as powerful and he wasn't even considered. Jiraiya refused to become Hokage even though the two elders were pretty much begging the guy. Nobody had a clue of where Tsunade was, and Hiruzen, the previous Hokage, was actually dead. Tsunade is in a coma. She's still alive when Danzo becomes Hokage, so in theory it was so much easier for Danzo to become Hokage after the Chunin exams, but he doesn't. And the reason why, or at least the out-of-universe reason as to why, is because Danzo is a retcon. The existence of the character is a retcon. And a lot of people are gonna say, oh my god, Daigo, everything is a retcon for you now, man, it's getting boring. But it's not my fault that Naruto has a lot of retcons. Everything I say is a retcon actually is a retcon. I'm not lying here. Danzo, quote-unquote, did not exist back in Naruto Part 1, otherwise he would have been introduced at the latest after the Chunin exams, because this is literally the perfect opportunity for the character to show up and try to become Hokage. But of course, Danzo was only introduced after the Kazekage rescue arc in Naruto Shippuden with the Root Anbu alongside him. And this is a retcon that I enjoy. As I said before, like Danzo's character. The Root Anbu is kinda whack. They don't do anything. I don't like Sai very much, like at all. But Danzo himself is a fascinating character with a different philosophy and an interesting foil for many characters in the story. I wish Naruto had more interactions with Danzo. They would have been very interesting to see because they're complete opposites. Kishimoto introduced Danzo and created this new character because, first of all, he needed some mystery for the Tenchi Bridge arc, including Sai's character with a book and, oh, what's going on there? Is he going to kill his brother in the end of the book or the middle? And what's Sai's real purpose in the mission? Oh, he's actually going to ally himself with Orochimaru? Oh, no, he's not. Oh, he wants to kill Sasuke, and then he kind of gets talked on Jutsu, and no, he's going to join Naruto's side. Danzo's obviously the one commending that. He needs Sasuke to be dealt with because he's a danger to the Leaf Village, and Danzo is a looming presence that makes the story more tense, because when is this guy gonna act? What's gonna happen? He is sus, man. I don't like him. Hey, what's going on? And let's be real, people love to hate a character like Danzo, so it's a very good inclusion. It's just that it makes no sense for Danzo not to be introduced or shown or for him to do anything at all after Hiruzen dies. First of all, because Hiruzen was a very important part of Danzo's character, and second of all, because of the situation and the plot. It's the perfect opportunity for Danzo to achieve his life goal of destroying the Will of Fire, essentially. And think about this. Naruto and Jiraiya are searching for Tsunade for at least a month. We don't know exactly how long that mission was, but it took some time, so the Leaf Village was Hokage-less for a month or even more. That's plenty of time for Danzo to act and become Hokage some way, especially when you consider Danzo has Shisui's Mangekyo and can cast Koto Matsukami. Are you telling me he couldn't have cast Koto Matsukami on the two elders, for example? Cast on the guy one day and then on the lady the other day, because he can only cast it once a day, but like, cast it twice on them, I don't know. And then cast it on the feudal lord. GG, man, you become Hokage. There's nothing stopping you, really. Jiraiya is not in the village. He's like the most powerful shinobi you have, except for Guy, but Guy wasn't really Hokage material, never has been. And Kakashi, well, even if he was a good candidate at that point, he was knocked out by Tsukuyomi anyways. He only wakes up when Tsunade gets back to the village and heals him. So the path is wide open for Danzo to become Hokage, and yet he doesn't because the character did not exist in that point in time. And I can see some people saying that just because a new character gets introduced, it doesn't mean there was a retcon to the story, because obviously we didn't know the character before because he's just being introduced now, right? And that's true. Obviously, introducing a new character doesn't equate to a retcon by default. However, the situation is different because there was a perfect time in the story that the character should have acted and he didn't. And also, just because I say the word retcon, it doesn't mean it's something bad. People take that as a flaw in the story, but sometimes retcons are necessary and sometimes they improve the story a lot. Well, sometimes they're horrible too, like the Kaguya retcon. And in Danzo's case, I kind of like the retcon because I like the character and I like what he does in the story. The issue is that it creates this weird plot hole, but we can try and solve this plot hole in universe without modifying the story. Let's try and justify why Danzo did not act at all to become Hokage, even though he had the perfect chance. Because if you think about it, every single plot hole can be explained with enough thought. Obviously, some plot holes are much easier to be explained than others, so much so that many instances that a lot of people call plot holes are not plot holes. They're just more nuanced parts in the story that require a lot more thought or attention for you to understand what's going on, but everything is actually explained or at least implied. Others, however, are plot holes and make no sense, but if you want to justify something hard enough, you can find an explanation. I mean, if you take a look at the Star Wars expanded universe, 90% of those books are just justifying plot holes, so yeah, you can justify anything if you go hard enough, and this Danzo plot hole kind of falls in the middle. It's not a completely nonsensical plot hole, but it's also not something that's actually implied or explained in the story but difficult to understand, although I would put this Danzo plot hole much closer to an explainable plot hole if you look hard enough than something nonsensical. Now, the only feasible explanation as to why he wouldn't want to become Hokage at that point was because Itachi Itachi Uchiha showed up in the village after several years. And obviously Itachi and Danzo have a long history together. Danzo is pretty much the guy that orchestrated the Uchiha clan massacre, forcing Itachi to destroy his entire family. And Itachi scared Danzo a lot before he left the village, saying that if he did anything to Sasuke, he would leak the village's information everywhere. And I mean, it's pretty much implied that Itachi would just go and kill Danzo if he walked out of line. Itachi's much stronger than Danzo, and Danzo knows that. That's why he's so terrified of Itachi. Can you imagine Danzo? Oh my god, I will be Hokage now that Hiruzen died, finally. But then Itachi shows up. Imagine his face, like, oh my god, this little bastard. Now, one could argue that Itachi told Danzo not to mess with Sasuke, and that doesn't mean Danzo couldn't become Hokage, but if Danzo became Hokage, that just would put a much bigger target on his back, and Itachi would be much more attentive as to what Danzo was doing. If Danzo was Hokage, he has so much more power, he can do so many more things, even covertly speaking, that Itachi wouldn't have much control or knowledge of, and so you could even argue that to prevent Danzo from doing anything to Sasuke, because Itachi knew how much Danzo liked the Uchiha eyes, he would just preemptively kill Danzo to avoid any issues. And yeah, I guess that's an explanation. Obito later on, when he is telling Sasuke about Itachi's real life and why he massacred the clan, mentions that Itachi shows up after the Chunin exams, after Hiruzen dies, to essentially tell Danzo and the elders that, quote-unquote, I am still here, don't try anything stupid with Sasuke. So you may think that's a perfect explanation. However, there's a good case for Itachi's real story to be a retcon as well, and the original intention of Kishimoto was to make Itachi an evil guy all along, but we can make another video about that in the future. It's not the point here. The point is that Itachi's warnings and Itachi's entire threat was about Danzo doing something to Sasuke, and Danzo becoming Hokage doesn't necessarily mean he's gonna do anything to Sasuke. I mean, it's likely, but if Danzo quote-unquote behaves. And there's also another issue to this explanation, which is that Jiraiya is offered the Hokage position before they know about Itachi's presence in the Leaf Village. So technically, Danzo should have tried to become Hokage before Itachi's presence was known, because, oh, I mean, I guess I can become Hokage, right? But then Itachi shows up and Danzo's like, nope, I am not gonna become Hokage anymore. And that's when they offer it to Jiraiya. So that doesn't really make much sense, and that's why it's a plot hole. However, you can also explain that away, saying that Danzo would never become Hokage as long as Itachi is alive, because he's just too afraid of becoming a presence in the village that Itachi would think is a threat to Sasuke. And that's why he only decides to go for the post of Hokage after Tsunade gets in a coma, because Itachi was actually dead and he couldn't do anything about it. Well, and at that point in the story, Sasuke wasn't even in the village anymore, so it wouldn't matter too much, but still. Regardless of the explanation, this is something that should have been implied, or at least shown a little bit in the story. Have Danzo think he'll become Hokage, and then you can have a little snippet here and there of him becoming doubtful, maybe because he's aware of Itachi's presence, or because Itachi shows himself to him. Obviously, at that point, Itachi wasn't supposed to be known as a good guy, but you can do things pretty covertly in the story. You can hide the actual presence of Itachi and just show Danzo being afraid, or you can just have a scene of Danzo and one of his subordinates, and they're talking, and the subordinate asks, wait, why don't you want to become Hokage now? It's the perfect chance. And Danzo's like, no, it's too early. There's an eyesore that hasn't been taken care of yet. And then you cut to Itachi fighting against Asuma and Kurenai or whatever. Now, if you wanted a scene like that to be done after the Chunin exams, which should have been done, Danzo would have needed to be introduced even before that, so that we know what the deal of the character is, why he wants to be Hokage, or why he's even having that conversation. Or you could maybe try and introduce Danzo after the Chunin exams. However, showing Danzo's failure to ascend to the Hokage post wouldn't be the main point of the story in that particular arc anyway, so having an introduction of a character in the middle of Itachi's and Kisame's appearance in the Leaf Village could create pacing issues and make things awkward to order in the story, and Danzo wouldn't be a very prominent character in the Search for Tsunade arc anyway, so introducing a character for him to do that in the beginning of the arc would be kind of a waste. Now, to be fair, when Danzo was actually introduced, he doesn't do much, but he's always a presence. But Jiraiya and Naruto leave the village for a good while, and so Danzo wouldn't even be a presence here, because at least in the Tenchi Bridge arc, Danzo's presence was felt through Sai's actions, and he was mentioned several times. I don't see him being mentioned by Jiraiya while he's teaching Naruto the Rasengan, for example. So the optimal solution would obviously be to introduce Danzo earlier on, when he could still interact with Hiruzen while he was alive, because Hiruzen was a massive part of Danzo's character. And I can only imagine how fun an interaction between Danzo and Hiruzen would be. Two old men, very different personalities. Hiruzen pretty much playful all the time, Danzo always serious, but then sometimes Hiruzen gets serious when Danzo steps on a line. You could even add a scene of Danzo mourning Hiruzen's death, and actually mourning his death, being sad about it, because even though they had completely different philosophies, they were still friends in the end, and Danzo respecting Hiruzen because he has strong convictions and he was a powerful shinobi, and also being jealous of him at the same time. This would be a very interesting dynamic. Obviously, it wouldn't be the focus of anything in the story. There's so many other things that are more important than this, I would say, but this would have added another layer to the Naruto series in the beginning of the story, and it would also solve the issue of this plot hole that's created with Danzo's introduction later in Naruto Shippuden. But obviously, hindsight's 2020, and Kishimoto was pretty much coming up with things as he wrote Naruto. He had a few things planned out, but most things he was just kinda coming up with on the fly. He never intended Naruto to be such a long series, but because it was so successful, they just kept on going, and I'm glad they did. And that's why Naruto has so many retcons, and many retcons in Naruto actually improve the story, so I am fine with them. And obviously, hindsight's 2020. It's much easier to point out flaws in the story after it's written, and especially when Kishimoto has to write a chapter every week when he was doing Naruto. That makes things much more difficult to plan out. Obviously, a few mangakas plan out their entire stories, but it was Naruto's case, and it's not its fault. But if you want to see Naruto written with hindsight 2020, you can check out my Rewrite Naruto series, where I actually implement these ideas of introducing Danzo very early on in Naruto Part 1 and him interacting with Hiruzen and stuff like that, and why he chose not to become Hokage after Hiruzen's death. So definitely watch it here. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Like the video because it really helps me. Ring notifications, comment down below what you thought of the video, and thank you so much for watching.